All right, you people making me late. That's right, it's your fault. Yeah, somebody's fault, not mine. Never mind. Oh, that's right, yeah. Oh, yeah. Good morning, everybody. All right, Sunday morning, we are in the book of Hebrews, chapter 12, and moving right along in this study. After this, let's see, Sunday morning, Wednesday night, Sunday morning, Wednesday night. So we're just in Daniel, yeah, so. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that when this class is done, we'll be getting into some Christian thinking, Christian living type things, which is just will be coming under construction at some point. But I think that's where we've decided to move in that direction. But meanwhile, we are still here in the book of Hebrews, and you feel like leading a prayer, Rick, this morning? Okay. Yeah.
Dear Lord in heaven, thank you, Lord, for allowing us all to come together and assemble and manage our word. Help our minds and hearts to be attentive and to apply the things that Brother Darrell is teaching us. Help us, Lord, to blot out or push away any of the things of the world so that we can concentrate on this time to study and learn more. We pray this in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Okay. All right, so let's get going here. In chapter 12, we have several topics, if you will, that are contained here, as you see on the screen. Jesus, the example, we got into that already, I believe. And then the idea of discipline and God's discipline and what that means and what our attitude should be toward that, and then the contrast of Sinai and Zion. And so we'll get into this and see what we come up with. So as we start out this morning, I just want to give you a little bit of a really brief look back and bringing us up to where we are relative to the teaching of the book. This is very, very simple and very basic and brief. But chapters 1 through 10 comprise the doctrinal section of the book. Okay, and so there is, when we talk about doctrinal sections, usually what we mean is foundational teachings, basic foundation upon which application stands. Okay, so we usually talk in terms of doctrine and application. The teaching and then application of that teaching. So that was the first 10 chapters, Christ in the New, and so we can say there's all kinds of new things, right? New covenant, new and living way, a bunch of new things, a bunch of better things, of course, that we read about. So Christ in the New is superior to the old. So we've spent a lot of time talking about that and what makes the new covenant better than the old. That being the case, don't draw back. So very basic, right? What we've been offered is better. Don't go backward, especially when you take into account the fact that if you go backward, it's to destruction. Okay. And then the second bullet point, a loss of faith can cause one to draw back. Practice a saving faith. And so we have in chapter 11 examples of what that looks like. in the lives of various people, and it should look the same way in our life, just applied to our circumstances. Now he deals with the subject of discipline to keep us strong, okay? But chastening, as we're going to talk about this, the discipline of the Lord can also discourage. So it can make us stronger, but it can also discourage us. And so and I think this is really important based on my observation and experience, because sometimes when things get really hard for us, we tend to get discouraged and blame God or where is God and those kind of things. And often other people don't know that. Okay? People are showing up to services and kind of doing those outward things, but inwardly they're in turmoil because of some. Sometimes it's just where the person is spiritual maturity-wise, and sometimes it's just a real hard things. And so anyway, we'll talk more about that because he's going to get into this. Okay, so as we go into the text then this morning, Hebrews chapter 12. All right, so one of the things that we talked about as we flowed into the 12th chapter was the way the 11th chapter ended by saying, and all these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. Okay? And so the hearers, as we go into chapter 12, know that they are inseparably linked to those faithful people who had gone before. There's a link there. They didn't have what these Hebrews had. Okay? And even though they had not received the promises, we're not talking even about after this life, just the promises that permeate the Old Testament with regard to the kingdom and the king and all of those things that the prophets talk about, the picture that they paint. They died without receiving those things, but we, and including the Hebrew hearers here, we have. And so if they were faithful, trusting in God through all of those circumstances, no matter what they were, and they didn't have what you have, what excuse do you have not to remain faithful when you do have what they didn't have? You see? So that's the perfect part. That's the completeness. They didn't, we do. And and they were faithful, you be faithful. And it just comes together and it's just one people. It's one plan. It's one thing, right? And so that's what he's pointing out. So now, as he goes into the 12th chapter, we're going to look at really allude to the hardships that the Hebrews are going through and put them in their proper perspective. So the approval that those people in Hebrews 11 gained, the approval that they gained was worth what they had to pass through. Okay? It was worth it. Okay? And so their lives, the way they lived, the way they were faithful, demonstrated the reality of those promises, those future promises that God had made. They saw them. They welcomed them from a distance. They lived their lives through them, through their hope in those things that were coming. Okay? And so any amount of rejection that the world may have thrown upon them was worth enduring for the approval of God, right? And so suffering was temporary. The victory is forever, right? So that's the perspective that he wants them to have. Whatever we go through in this life is temporary, okay? But when we pass through it and are with God, that is forever. So God gave them the ability to keep that vision alive as reflected in 11:13, for instance. All died in faith, not having received what was promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged they were strangers and exiles on the earth. In verse 26, speaking of Moses, he considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward, looking forward, keeping their hope alive as they were able to look forward and keep their minds on what was coming, that gave them the power to endure. You know, sometimes we say, keep the faith, which came from a different context, but it fits here also, all right? Okay, so we have this great cloud of witnesses. We look to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Right? Okay. So he says, consider him, in verse 3, he says, consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood, and have forgotten the exhortation and have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the one he loves and chastises every son whom he receives. All right. So let's see what we can make of that and how that has maybe played out in your life. There's a passage in Revelation chapter 2. Well, in Revelation 2:13. Scratch that. Revelation 2:3. He says to the church at Ephesus, I know you are enduring patiently and bearing up for my name's sake, and you have not grown weary. Okay? You have not grown weary. The book Galatians 6 also speaks to that same idea, do not grow weary in doing good, for in due time you shall reap if you do not, well, I got these two translations in my head now. So if you don't faint, if you don't grow weary, so keep doing good, even though you're going to get tired sometime, all right? And so that's the idea, and that's the truth that he's going to be pointing out. See, so doing good in a hostile environment can cause you to get tired, right? Okay, so the world doesn't support you. The world's ideas, standards, everything is contrary to Christ, to the principles by which Christians strive to live. And when you're told to, as you have opportunity, do good to all men, well, even if they don't treat me right, yeah, right? If they've made themselves an enemy, yeah, okay. And so some of the things that God asks us to do in this environment can make you weary. Sheila?
But is it just the world? Or is it people in the body of Christ? That you always, ever since a couple of Sundays ago, and I'm thinking about Moses, how he was going in and, you know, he was trying to get the people together and to do right and stuff, you know, to see what he was doing or what God was trying to do. Then I wonder how he became discouraged, you know, and then I think about how Jesus, taking on the form of man, how he became discouraged, you know, because he's trying to do good
Mm-hmm.
and show people a better way, you know, of thinking and how to treat one another and how it can wear you down, because I know it for myself, just from experience, it can wear you down, you know, but you see the stuff, but then you can't change people, you know what I mean? All you can do is pray for people, so it's like,
Yeah.
you know, you can become weary, but you got to stay focused on what God.
You do.
Yeah, you got to stay focused in the Word.
Yeah, you do. And, you know, and I'm glad you brought that up. You know, I'm being very, very charitable in not including the brethren in things. But, you know, it's kind of like your family in the sense that, you know, there's relationships, and, you know, the Bible is full of, the New Testament is full of being patient with one another, forbearing. That means putting up with one another, praying for one another. So there's a lot of instruction that we're given about our relationship as Christians. And depending on your situation, it can be hard. And I, you know, speak to people, and I have classes with people during the week from other states and other congregations, other situations, and some of them are not very good. You know, there's a lot of legalism out there, closed-mindedness, pettiness, church leaders that are power hungry. You know, so that's the thing about, you know, congregational life. And I always tell people that are new to the faith or relatively new is that as you go through your life, you're going to see a lot of things. If you're a member of, you know, various congregations in the course of your life, you're going to see and experience things in those situations, but you do not allow other people's stuff to cause you to get discouraged, right? Because we're all imperfect people, and we're at different places in growth and whatnot. So that being patient with one another and bearing up, you know, or forbearing one another, those are real important things. So you're going to see things, and don't. You know, my advice is always to, you know, you try to find people within a congregation. You know, take your time, be there, listen to people talk. What are they talking about? How do they carry themselves? And try to associate yourself with spiritual people, because everybody in a given congregation may or may not be. Okay? All right? Okay, you want to follow up, and then Gina.
Oh, so, yeah, you know, so God kind of build you up, well, he do build you up as you go on, you know, to deal with the circumstances inside the body.
Yeah,
You know, it ain't too much we can do with the world.
yeah,
You know what I mean? But the body, to me, my brothers and sisters in Christ is more important than my family, siblings, or
Yeah.
husband, daughters, or whatever.
yeah,
Because they in the body and serving God and trying to get their rewards, you know. So these are the people I need to put first in my life, you
You-
know. So
yeah,
if I'm thinking like this, you know, and I can't put my thought on other people, you know, I
Yeah.
got to wait till they get there. But in the meantime, I can't become discouraged
well, yeah,
because it's not happening. You know what I mean? So
yeah, yeah.
it's more than just. Let me be quiet. Okay.
All right. So,
Shut up, Sheila.
yeah, so I've seen people leave the Lord because of things that Christians have said or done, which is short-sighted, okay, very short-sighted, because what are they going to do for you? You know, okay, yeah.
So I think that's getting back to Hebrews, why verse 2 is so important.
Uh-huh,
Because it's saying looking to Jesus.
that's right,
He's the founder and the perfecter of our faith.
yeah,
He set the example. All these other people that were acknowledged ahead of time, this cloud of witnesses, they weren't Jesus.
right,
They were sinful men that, but they walked in faith. And Romans tells us that all have sinned and we all fall short of the glory of God, every last one of us. Before I left to go to Germany when I first got married, I had a privilege of having a time to sit with my grandfather. Most of you knew him. And he said to me something really profound. He said, don't ever trust preachers.
yeah,
Don't ever put your faith in preachers
Yep.
because they're men.
Yep.
They can be wrong.
that's right,
Dive into the Word, put your faith in Christ. So I tried to raise my children that same way. Don't look to me for perfection. I'm not perfect. I will never be perfect. There's one that's perfect. He will always be there. He will always be the example. And when other people around you fall short, you know what? It's your job to put your faith in Christ and be a working, living example and help to maybe encourage them back to this. Love them anyway. Pray for them. But I'm very fortunate in my upbringing. In some ways, it was a privilege and it was a profound influence and joy because I had incredible examples on both sides of my family. But it also sometimes makes it a little bit difficult because you have to look. You have to learn how to look at yourself like anybody else does, and you can't just put your faith in people.
right,
They got to be in Christ.
right, right. Todd, you have something?
Yeah, just a quick one on verse 4, where he's talking about you haven't resisted yet to the point of shedding blood. Now, I guess my question is this kind of prophetic in that he's saying you will pretty soon have to shed blood, or is he saying you should have but you didn't?
Well, that's interesting. I picked up on that too this week, and I had never taken real note of that little word yet. You have not yet. Okay, so I think that points to the fact that it's not necessarily that they're going to, but it's always a possibility. And as of now, he's saying you have not shed blood. Okay, in your striving against sin. And so you can take that as you haven't done, that hasn't happened yet, but it's going to, or it hasn't happened yet up to this point, and it's not necessarily going to, but he's just pointing out that if you are going to start drifting backward, if you're going to shrink back because of what you've been going through, whatever it is that you have been going through, you haven't shed your blood. Now, when he's telling them this is an allusion to the Olympic Games back then, and boxing. And so the fighters would, at first, they wrap their fists in leather, so they could hit hard, and then over time they would wrap their wrists also with leather. And then as time went on, they would go up to the elbow, and then finally all the way the whole arm. And then ultimately they would put pieces of stone or metal so they could just really rip somebody up. So it was a bloody mess. People died, and so he's alluding to this when he tells them, "You have not yet shed blood." In your striving against sin, and that's where their minds would go, okay? And Paul uses that boxing metaphor in the 1 Corinthian letter also, but yeah, it hadn't gone to that point up to this time, okay? And but that little yet there, so in verse 5, he's quoting from Proverbs 3, 11, and 12, which basically says the same thing. You can look it up if you like, but it's pretty much the same thing, same wording that he's alluding to here as he goes back. And you have forgotten the exhortation that addresses you, or New American Standard makes it a statement, and this one is a question. So, my son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him, for the Lord disciplines the one he loves and chastises every son whom he receives. So, when there is a circumstance in your life that it's of such a nature that it could discourage you, which means that it's something that's not easy, whatever it may be, what are our choices? What are our choices? You know, we could curse God and die as per Job's wife, you know, say, you know what, it's not worth it. And you think about those individuals in the scriptures who were asking that kind of question. Psalm 73 and Asaph, and it's surely in vain I've washed my hands in innocence. He's looking at people in the world, godless people, and how well they're doing, and they have money, and they're successful, and they're just living their lives, and they seem so happy and everything. And here I am, concerned every day about my relationship with God, concerned about the life that I'm living, wanting to be right in His sight, and just I'm very loosely paraphrasing, but that's the idea, you know. So he's looking at it. Well, you know, what's the use? What's the point, right? Jeremiah asked God, "Are you to me like a deceptive stream?" Et cetera, et cetera. So in the book of Jeremiah, here he is trying to serve God. He's said, I'm not sitting with the merrymakers. I'm not partying. I'm doing your will. I'm serving you. And are you unreliable? Can I not even trust you? Okay. So, you know, this is not a new kind of sentiment. In light of the scriptures, it's there. People questioned. They're going through hard times. Where's God? You know, can I trust you? So that's not unusual. But what are our choices then? So we can say God's unreliable and it's not worth it, right? I mean, I'm going through all this. Where is He? Okay. Well, let me ask you, first of all, in this context of discipline or chastisement, and that's not chastisement because you did something wrong and now God's punishing you. Okay, get that out of your head. He doesn't do that. It's not about punishing you, all right? But in the context of that, we have the choice, as we can say, well, it's not worth it and just leave the Lord, which people have done, or we can submit to it. We can cast our anxiety upon Him and serve Him anyway. Okay? Yeah.
But you know, when you know you done tasted the Lord and know that He's good and know what He done brought you through, I mean, if you really believe God and believe in Him and trust Him with everything you have, you can look, you'll be right there and say like, oh, forget, no, I'm moving on.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because you know what He done did.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
You got that.
Yes.
And so, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Kevin?
Something that struck me when I was studying this was that the shift here to that he addresses you as sons now, and like the rest of the book up until now was talking about Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And like, he starts out by establishing, like, he lists all these passages in chapter 1 about like to the Son he says
Mm-hmm.
all these things, and of the Son he says that he was made a little while lower than the angels.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, in a sense, Christ was disciplined too, being subjected as a human and this process. And so, like, I'm seeing this should be taken not as like this, like you were saying like a chastisement or threatening
Right.
danger of discipline, but I think he's calling us to think back of Jesus was subjected to discipline
Yep.
and has proved himself worthy. And then, like as we go through this, like don't forget that you are sons. And just like Jesus is seated at the right hand of on the throne of God, we're about to get to you haven't come to Mount Sinai, you've come to the throne of God
Yeah.
as sons.
Yeah.
I think that's just like I think that's such a big thing for us. That's hard for me to wrap my mind around, but like this just seems
Yeah.
big.
Yeah, yeah. Let's keep Gina's statement in mind, or the idea she put out here of fixing our eyes on Jesus and see how the rest of this chapter goes back to that. And that's another aspect of that same thing. You know, I'm thinking here that, you know, he could be saying, after he said, you know, fixing your eyes on Jesus and whatnot, you know, and saying in this way, after looking at Jesus, well, you haven't shed blood in your resisting sin, but look at him. He has, right? And how did Jesus, according to chapter 5, learn obedience or learn what obedience is? Through the things that he suffered, right? So there we still have that same example. In fact, the writer could have got here in chapters 12 and said, parentheses, and put chapter 5, verse 9 in there, right? Let me remind you, you know, that he suffered. He learned what obedience is through suffering, because you have to suffer to learn what obedience is. Okay? Okay, very good. So he treats us as sons, you know, and daughters. He brings daughters in several passages here, and so we're his children, and that discipline is a part of that. So in chapter 10, we read about some of the things that they were suffering. You know, we've talked about their families and, you know, whatever position they had. A lot of things were stripped away from them when they walked away from the Jewish faith. Okay, and they're ridiculed and mocked by those Jews, you know, and I can just imagine, you know, people saying, you know, are you out of your mind? Like, I think I used the example of being down in Alabama and this little town down there to preach, and one of the former members of the Baptist church, which was the big one in that little town, you know, saying, and I'm with the guy and we're walking, and the lady came up and said to him, "You letting these people throw water on you and tell you it's raining, right? You're letting these people deceive you." Okay, well, same thing here. These Jews would go to these Jews that have left the Jewish faith and you know, why are you letting these people throw the wool? Where's their priest? Where's their, where's their stuff? You know, which is I could articulate that better, I think, but you know, all that the Abraham and the temple and the sacrifices and the priesthood and all that they have, and you walk into a little assembly like this of Christians, and you can just imagine Pharisees walking in here and looking around and going, "What are you people doing?" You know? And you have to have some solid spiritual ground under you to stand up to that, and look what's happening to them. They're starting to go, well, maybe, maybe we did make the wrong choice. Okay. All right. So he'll go on with this here as he continues. It is for discipline that you endure. It is for discipline that you endure. So what is God trying to teach me through this difficult circumstance? See, we want to look outward and go, if you are causing me pain, and people do, we do cause each other pain. There's no doubt about that. But what can you do in the circumstance, but look within and say, what is God trying to teach me through this circumstance because you don't have control over anything or anybody outside of yourself. You don't have control over that. The only thing we have control is God and me, and saying, I'm going to stay faithful to you through this, Lord, and he is teaching you something. He prunes you so that you can bear more fruit, okay? And if he doesn't do that, if he just goes, well, hey, whatever, right? Okay. That's not good. If he doesn't care enough, how many children have said this? I remember this kid on TV one time getting a GED, didn't graduate from high school, saying, I wish my parents had disciplined me so that I could have graduated from high school. So he looks at his parents and they were just, hey, whatever. Okay. Well, that's not loving him. See? So anyway, yeah, Gina.
Well, I think it's really interesting if you look at that. It is the discipline that you have to endure. Discipline doesn't mean punishment.
No.
And that's, I think, the thing that we kind of get screwed up in our heads. Discipline means education and training and the whole thing in one fell swoop. Jesus went through all kinds of turmoil, all kinds of stuff. God's love was constant. It was always there. Just like a father who's training his son. He doesn't quit loving him just because he falls down and can't stand back up on his own for a minute or two. He's patient and he's loving and he's training and he's teaching. And if we're enduring those things, God is training us. He is teaching us. And sometimes, we endure certain things and then we look back later on and go, I'm so thankful I went through that because God helped me make it. He got me through that and he helped me to see and have more empathy and be more patient and be kinder. And, you learn so much through it on the other side.
Yeah, and he'll fill this out. But the thing is that it's for discipline. So when you're enduring, the goal is for you to be a more disciplined individual as a result of enduring the trial. If you don't endure the trial, then you get no benefit. God wants you to benefit through the trial. So he allows these things to be in our life so that he'll fill this out here as he goes, because we're we're in kind of a spot with it here. So he says, what son is there whom his father does not discipline? If you are left without discipline, in which all have participated, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. If you see a kid acting up in the grocery store and people walk by and just kind of look at him and keep on walking, what do you know? If that's not his parents, okay? But when somebody takes some kind of action, which may be standing by him and going, we'll wait, throw your tantrum, we'll wait, training him that it doesn't do any good, then that's the parents, because they are interested in what that child is doing and what that child needs to learn. And so it's no different here with us, okay? And so let's see what we got up here, 7 and 8, okay? All right. Oh, well, that's, okay. So if you're left without discipline, it says, verse 9, besides this, we had earthly fathers who disciplined us and we respected them. Now, when it comes to earthly fathers, are they perfect? Okay. No, they're not. Even the best are not perfect, and some are just utterly not good at all. And there's a lot of people right now that are not Christians who have been exposed to the gospel, who may have a spouse that's a Christian, who refuse to become a Christian because they learn their perception of God through a mean, exasperating father, and they're hurt, and they're immature, and so ask, why would God allow that to happen? I prayed to God that he would stop beating my mother. I prayed that he would stop beating me. I prayed, and nothing happened. See? And so they don't want anything to do with God. Right? And so fathers, earthly fathers, the whole spectrum from, really bad ones to ones that are doing the very best they can to be the best father, yet none of them are perfect. Okay? And so that's what his point is here. But we had earthly fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? Right? For they disciplined us for a short time as it seems best to them. They disciplined us to help us in this life for a short time. Okay? Okay? To prepare us, fathers want their sons to, find their niche in life. They want them to be successful. Okay? And so earthly fathers, in this sense, I know that there's spiritual training when you're talking about either Jewish fathers or Christian fathers, but the discipline administered by an earthly father is so that you can have success in this life for a short time. But God, he says, disciplines us for our good, that we may share his holiness. Okay? That's for a long time, or not even a long time, forever, right? Nothing to do with time. Okay? And so, you're suffering, Hebrews, Hebrew Christians. You're going through a lot of tough things. But there's a purpose, okay? And this is important. And that verse 11 here is one that, that's interesting. If you want to know why I'm saying that, ask me later. The little circles, I was doing something with those. So, in fact, I shared this verse with a young man, I don't know, a week and a half ago in a certain situation. He's struggling, trying to get by one day at a time, trying to change his life. And so afterward, I told him about this passage. Okay, so for the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant. Okay, but so we all understand that. There's no sense in sugarcoating that. Sometimes it's just painful, but later, discipline. Okay, it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. Okay? And so this young man that I shared this with, he's like, where is that? Where is that? And I told him with the chapter and the verse, the book chapter and verse for it, that really, so in other words, he was hopeful. He was, a few minutes before that, he's like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm trying, and this is not like I've been all my life. I've been totally different, and he's just, my heart just went out to him. But he was his demeanor just changed when I quoted this to him, because it means that what you're going through right now has a purpose, and there's an after. See? And afterwards, there's peace. Okay? There's peace. Then you go to Romans, in Romans 5, we exult in our tribulations, knowing that tribulation brings about perseverance, the very endurance that the writer here is talking about. And perseverance proven character. You've been through the fire. The slag is being burned out. The useless, futile things that we carry. That's what the Lord wants. You know, the proven character and proven character hope. See, and that's what this is giving. And that's what that young man was given. He's like, hope. Hey, man, don't just keep going because it's going to be worth it, and there's an afterward, and you're going to be at peace. See? It's one of my absolute favorite passages in all the Bible, but we're out of time for class, and so we're going to have to pick up at verse 12 of Hebrews 12, a bit easy to